Across the United States right now, beneath the political divisions and economic anxieties and social conflicts that dominate headlines, something deeper and harder to name may be shifting. Many Americans feel more connected than ever before through technology. We're just a text message or social media post away from hundreds of people. Yet at the same time, rates of depression, anxiety, loneliness, and what researchers call deaths of despair are climbing. People report feeling more uncertain about purpose, identity, and what makes life meaningful. So we need to ask a fundamental question. Is America facing a genuine crisis of meaning? And if so, what's causing it? What does it look like in people's actual lives, and what might come next? Let's explore this together. Welcome to the Scholar's Ledger, where history, faith, and power are revealed. Before we dive in, we need to acknowledge that meaning is really hard to define precisely. It's not something you can measure or quantify easily. For some people, meaning comes primarily from religious faith, from understanding themselves as part of God's plan, from serving a divine purpose, from being connected to something transcendent. For others, it comes from work and achievement, from building something, from contributing to society through career. For still others, meaning comes from relationships and family, from love and connection, from being part of a community. And for many people, meaning comes from some combination of all these sources. But here's what we're seeing in contemporary America. The traditional sources that provided meaning for previous generations are shifting, weakening, or fragmenting in ways that leave many people uncertain about where to find purpose and significance. When long-standing answers to "why does my life matter" no longer feel sufficient or available, where do people turn? That's the crisis we're examining today. Let's start by understanding what's changed. Historically, most Americans shared relatively common frameworks for understanding meaning and purpose. These frameworks were often rooted in religious faith, particularly Christianity. You were here to glorify God, to serve others, to live according to biblical principles, and your life had meaning because it fit into God's larger story. They were rooted in community and tradition. You were part of a town, a neighborhood, an extended family, and your identity and purpose came partly from your role in those stable communities. They were rooted in clear social scripts about adulthood. You grew up, got married, had kids, worked hard, contributed to your community, and that progression provided structure and meaning. But contemporary America is fundamentally different. Society has become dramatically more diverse, not just ethnically and culturally, but in terms of beliefs, values, and worldviews. You can't assume that your neighbors share your understanding of meaning and purpose the way you might have been able to a few generations ago. America has become more individualistic, with less emphasis on conforming to community expectations and more emphasis on defining your own path. There's a verse in Proverbs that says, "Where there is no vision, the people perish," which could be interpreted as a warning that shared vision and purpose are necessary for community health. So here's the question. Does diversity of belief and individual freedom enrich the search for meaning by providing more options and authentic choice? Or does it make meaning harder to find because there's no common foundation, no shared story everyone participates in? Add loneliness, anxiety, and feelings of meaninglessness. The constant comparison, the curated perfection everyone presents, the shallow interactions that replace deep relationships. All of this seems to undermine rather than support meaning. The infinite scroll of content, the constant notifications, the algorithmic manipulation of attention, these create distraction and fragmentation rather than focus and depth. So here's what we need to ask honestly. Does constant digital connection deepen meaning and provide genuine community? Or does it create distraction from the deeper questions and relationships that actually generate meaning? Because it seems like technology is great at providing entertainment, information, and surface-level connection, but it's terrible at providing the depth, stillness, and genuine relationship that meaning requires. And when we're constantly distracted, we never have to face the harder questions about purpose and significance that might actually lead somewhere. Let's examine how American individualism relates to this crisis of meaning, because this is really central but often misunderstood. American culture has always emphasized independence, self-reliance, and personal freedom. These are considered core values, almost sacred. And in recent decades, that individualism has extended to meaning and identity in new ways. People are encouraged, expected, to create their own path define their own values, build their own identity from scratch, rather than inheriting one from family or tradition. You're told to be yourself, to follow your dreams, to create your own meaning, to not let anyone else define you. There's a verse in Matthew where Jesus says, "Seek and you shall find," which gets interpreted in individualistic American culture as permission to construct your own spiritual path and understanding. This freedom is genuinely empowering for many people. It allows authentic self-expression, allows people to escape limiting traditions or expectations that didn't fit them. But here's the flip side. It places an enormous burden on individuals to figure everything out alone. Previous generations inherited ready-made answers about meaning, purpose, and identity. Those answers might have been restrictive or limiting, but they provided a foundation. Contemporary Americans are expected to build that foundation themselves, often without much guidance or support. And that's exhausting. It creates anxiety rather than freedom for many people, because not everyone has the resources, the insight, or the support to construct meaningful identity and purpose from scratch. So the question becomes, is the freedom to define yourself individually truly empowering? Or does it create a crushing burden when you're told that if your life doesn't have meaning, it's because you haven't worked hard enough to create it yourself? We can't discuss America's crisis of meaning without addressing what's happening to religious faith, which has historically been the primary source of meaning for most Americans. Traditional religious institutions are changing dramatically. Church attendance is declining, especially among younger generations. Religious affiliation is dropping. Nuns, who identify with no religion, are now the largest religious category among younger Americans. But this doesn't necessarily mean people aren't spiritual or aren't asking ultimate questions. What we're seeing is a shift away from organized religion toward more individualized spirituality. People still ask questions about truth, purpose, morality, and what happens after death. They're just less likely to look to churches or religious authorities for answers. They're constructing personalized belief systems, taking elements from different traditions, emphasizing personal experience over doctrine. The question is whether this shift is fundamentally connected to the crisis of meaning we're experiencing. Some would argue yes, that traditional religion, whatever its limitations, provided a coherent framework for understanding meaning and purpose. It answered the big questions. It provided community and ritual. It connected individuals to something larger than themselves. When that framework weakens or disappears, people are left searching for alternatives that often feel less substantial or satisfying. Others would argue that institutional religion was actually causing a crisis of meaning for many people, that its rigid answers, its exclusivity, its failure to address contemporary concerns was making people feel alienated rather than connected. From this view, the shift away from organized religion is part of the solution, not the problem. For many Americans, especially in the absence of traditional religious meaning, work and career achievement have become the primary source of identity and purpose. Your job isn't just how you make money. It's who you are. It's what gives your life significance. Success, advancement, professional achievement, these become the measures of a life well lived. But this creates multiple problems. First, economic pressures and changing job markets make this increasingly unstable. Second, tying meaning primarily to career achievement creates enormous pressure and anxiety. What happens if you don't succeed by conventional measures? What happens if you lose your job or burn out? Your entire sense of purpose collapses. Third, even people who do achieve conventional success often find it doesn't actually provide the fulfillment and meaning they expected. There's a verse in Mark where Jesus asks, "What does it profit a man to gain the whole world, yet lose his soul?" Which points to the limitation of external success as a source of ultimate meaning. We're seeing this play out in American culture. People achieving what they thought they wanted, getting the career success, the money, the status, and finding that it feels empty or hollow, that it didn't actually answer the deeper questions about significance and purpose. So we have to ask, can purpose genuinely be found in professional success and achievement alone? Or does meaning require something deeper, connection, transcendence, service, love, that career success can't provide by itself? The evidence suggests that work can contribute to meaning, but can't be the sole source without leaving people feeling unfulfilled. Scient wisdom traditions in exploring fundamental questions about how to live well. Even among people who reject organized religion, there's often spiritual exploration, creating personal practices, engaging with nature, seeking transcendence through various means. And we're seeing emphasis on authentic relationships and community building, people recognizing that connection and belonging are essential to meaning, even if they're harder to find in contemporary society. So maybe meaning isn't actually disappearing, maybe it's shifting, being found in different places and different ways than it was for previous generations. The question is whether these new sources can provide the depth, stability, and shared framework that traditional sources offered. Can individualized spirituality provide the same grounding as traditional religion? Can professional activism provide the same meaning as more comprehensive worldviews? We don't know yet because we're living through the experiment in real time. Worthwhile? What should I live for? These are eternal questions that every generation asks. In America today, that search may be more visible and more complex than it was when most people shared common frameworks for answering these questions. Whether we're in crisis or transition, whether the changes are fundamentally destructive or potentially generative, that depends partly on what comes next. On whether Americans can find or create new sources of meaning that are both personally authentic and provide the depth and stability that human beings need. On whether we can balance individual freedom with shared purpose, personal spirituality with community, achievement with deeper questions of significance. The future of meaning in America is being written right now in millions of individual searches and collective experiments. This is the Scholar's Ledger, where history, faith, and power are revealed. If this resonated with you, subscribe and share your thoughts. These questions matter.